Hi friends, welcome back or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the Chapter Conundrum, and in today's video we're going to talk about my November wrap up. So all the books I read in November and what my thoughts were on them. And we've got 7 books to talk about today, which isn't a ton for me, but I did get a whole ton of things outside of reading done in the month of November. I've got my Christmas shopping done and wrapped. I consistently uploaded. I have a bit of a backlog of filmed and edited videos scheduled, which is great. The house is already decorated for Christmas. I made a whole ton of food for Thanksgiving. I was getting stuff done. So I'm not mad that there's only 7 books here today. I still feel like that's pretty decent, but I definitely plan to step it up in December a bit. But anyways, the first book I read in the month of November was Funny Story by Emily Henry. And Emily Henry is one of those contemporary romance authors that people say you typically only love one of her books, and you don't really love the other ones. You may like them or you may not like them. It just depends. But I had yet to find my Emily Henry book that I loved, and finally I found it. This one I gave a 4.5-star rating. This absolutely does not have a realistic situation or setup for the premise at all. If you don't know, this follows a young lady who's engaged to someone, and they break up because on his, I don't know if it's his bachelor party or if it's just a night out, but anyway, he gets together with his best female friend and they want to move in to the place that she and her, I guess, ex are currently living. So she's kind of strapped for figuring out where to go until she realizes, hey, I can move into where this female friend was living with her ex, and then the romances between her and the other girl's ex. So definitely not something that feels all that realistic to happen in real life, but nonetheless, this was very entertaining and I really enjoyed the characters. Definitely true to Emily Henry's style, this felt very unique. The characters felt like they could be real people. And I thought this was particularly the case when it came to their backstories and kind of the things or baggage they brought into a relationship with them. I loved the things that Emily Henry chose to inject into these characters' backstories. I just wish that we had have gone a bit more in depth with them and just explored them a little bit more, specifically the love interests. But all in all, I still had a wonderful time with this book, and definitely this is my favorite Emily Henry. There's only one I haven't read yet, that's Book Lovers. So I'm gonna check that out at some point when my library hold for it eventually comes in. But I have a feeling that this one is going to stand as my favorite of hers. So next up, I read The Sun Down Motel by Simone St. James, and I read this for the vlog of my sister picking some of her 5-star thrillers for me to read, and I had a good time with this. I give it a 3.75-star rating, and I go into very detailed thoughts in the vlog as to why I chose the rating I did and what my enjoyment and explanations and reasoning were, so I'm not going to go too into it here. But essentially, this story follows 2 women. One is Viv, and she is in the 80s, and she is a girl who kind of left home, wanted to make her way to New York City. She was hitchhiking, but ended up stopped in Fell, New York on her way there, and kind of ended up making a little bit of a life for herself there. She ended up picking up the night shift clerk job at the Sun Down Motel, and she ends up going missing. But decades later, the other POV, her niece, Carly, has decided she wants to figure out whatever happened to her Aunt Viv. She wants to see if she can solve the mystery of her disappearance. And so she ends up going to Fell, New York and to the Sun Down Motel and seeing what she can find out. And she ends up also taking the night shift clerk position at the Sun Down Motel, which is fun. The gist of my basic overall thoughts were that I was more invested in Viv's timeline over Carly's, that the story was very atmospheric, but in that I feel like the pacing kind of suffered a little bit in terms of the plot. So I think this one, it depends what type of reader you are, whether you're going to love it or not. And then all in all, some of the reveals to me felt a little bit coincidental, like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Instead of like, what? So definitely not a new favorite for me, but I enjoyed it, had a good time with it, and could see why people love it. So next up, I picked up and read our October Thrill, Chill, or Kill book club pick. I was a little bit behind on them. So that was Extreme Makeover by Dan Wells. And if you don't know what this is, essentially this is a story of the apocalypse caused by cosmetic products. And that's pretty much all you need to know plot-wise about the premise of this. So needless to say, I was very intrigued by this going in, but I did have a few incorrect expectations. I thought that this was going to be more horror, especially having already read I'm Not a Serial Killer, but this definitely leans a lot more sci-fi. I thought that this read a little bit like a Blake Crouch book, so if you're a fan of his books, I would suggest that maybe check this out as well. I definitely thought that Dan Wells had a lot of creative thought and just planning and reasoning in terms of what happens in here and how it happens and how it affects everything in the world. I thought he definitely took the time to think things through when he wrote this, and I really appreciated it for that reason. But ultimately, I ended up having a problem where I was invested in like the bigger picture plot of what was happening with this apocalyptic scenario and with this cosmetic product. But then about 2/3 of the way into the book, the plot really became more about the characters that we had kind of gotten to know a little bit through the bigger picture story. And so when the plot became about the characters, I kind of lost interest, unfortunately. So ultimately, I gave this a 3.5 star rating. I still was entertained, but sadly, I didn't love it anywhere near as much as I enjoyed his John Cleaver series. Next up, I picked up and read the November Thrill, Chill, or Kill book club pick, which was Good Girls Don't Die by Christina Henry. And I ended up having a kind of mixed experience with this one. I also gave it a 3.5 star rating. And if you don't know, this has 3 main POVs, but instead of flip-flopping between the POVs, you sort of get a chunk of the first one, a chunk of the second one, a chunk of the third one, and then at the end, you sort of figure out what's going on in the bigger picture. But in the first POV, you have a woman who wakes up in what she feels is a new identity. She doesn't remember how she got here or who she is. She thinks like, this isn't my life, there's no way. And then in the second POV, you have a girl who's going on a friend's trip for her birthday with some of her college roommates, and one of their boyfriends ends up kind of hijacking the planned trip and taking them to this cabin in the woods, and they get there and it's kind of super sketchy. Like, things just feel off. And then in the third POV, you follow a woman who wakes up in a shipping crate along with other women, and she's told she has to compete in some kind of like obstacle course competition in order to see her family again. So in terms of my mixed experience, let's get into it. So the first and second POV for me were very solid. I really enjoyed reading about these characters' kind of experiences in their scenarios, and I liked trying to theorize and piece together what might be happening in the bigger picture, how they could possibly be related. But then we got to the third POV, and it really tried to be about the character dynamics in a scenario where it really should have been about the plot, because it didn't have enough time or page count to really flesh out the characters in order to really have a strong character dynamic situation going on that I grew attached to. And the scenario that they're put in plot-wise after the shipping container opening has a lot of potential. So like, I don't know why that specific section of the book wasn't a lot more focused on the plot. I would have enjoyed it had it been a lot more in that direction. But then we got to the ending, and let's just say I didn't love the reveal. You basically got a big villain monologue, but it wasn't really like nuanced in terms of like what the villain's motivations were. It was kind of just like, oh, I'm doing it because I can. Like, it just felt very mustache twirly, unrealistic, and it didn't work for me at all. The journey leading up to it was solid, but overall, I don't know. This just wasn't it, guys. There were also some mixed reactions and experiences on the Discord too, and I don't think it was an unpopular opinion to say that the ending of this just isn't all there. So next up, I picked up and reread Jade City, the first book in the Greenbone saga by Fonda Lee. And this is something I had been meaning to get to for quite a while. A while back, I did a which series should I prioritize finishing video, you decide, and overwhelmingly in the comments you guys wanted me to go back and reread Jade City and finish out the Greenbone saga. So I have finally started my journey of doing that, and I have to say I enjoyed my reread of this a lot more than I did the first time around. And I think part of that was that I was brand new to adult fantasy at the time. The first time I picked this up was in 2020, and I think I had read, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 adult fantasies total before that. And the other half, or the other aspect as to why I enjoyed it a lot more this time, was that I went in with correct expectations. So I had heard from many booktubers back in 2020 that Jade City was pretty action-packed. And so I was going in expecting like a really high stakes, like gang or mafia warfare scenario. But that's really not the core of it. Like, yes, that stuff is there, but I don't know. That's like maybe 5% of the content of the book, guys. Like, most of it is just the clan politics of the No Peak clan and the family dynamics of the lead family of this clan. And so I think just going in with the correct expectations and just being a lot more of a seasoned fantasy reader, and also just knowing the base storyline of this, I was able to catch on to a lot more detail on this reread. And I appreciated this book even more for that. So I have a couple standout things to point out about this book. One is that I really love Fauna Lee's world building. It feels very intentional, the things that she picks out and chooses to describe to you, because she doesn't spend a whole ton of time on description, and she kind of disperses descriptions here and there throughout the book. But the things that she chooses to focus on really give you a good sense of the world and the surroundings. So I think she definitely has a kind of an underrated talent for world building. But the second thing that I have to shout out that I love in this book, and hopefully will continue throughout the series, is that this definitely felt like it had real stakes. Things happen to these characters, and it's not all good. I really appreciated that she took those risks in such an early novel in her career. Overall, I had a great time with this, and I do still have a couple nitpicks. One is that since we're in the POVs for sort of like the head positions of this clan, it would have been way more interesting to see a lot more like planning in advance of like things happening to these characters. Like, obviously these characters have a plan going into certain situations in the book, but even though you're in their head, you have no idea what this plan is, what it looks like. And so I just kind of wish that we had gotten a bit more of like that planning, scheming process, and then watching how they react when things sort of fall apart from their plans. But who knows, maybe we'll get more of that in the sequels. So next up, I picked up and read Age of Legend, the 4th book in the Legends of the First Empire series by Michael J. Sullivan. And I gave this a 4-star rating. I obviously can't tell you too much about it given that it's the 4th book in a series, but I can say that this starts the 2nd arc of the series. It's kind of like having 2 trilogies that are connected in a way. The beginning of this opens with a couple key events with some time jumps in between them, and I thought that that could have been handled a little bit better. It took me a while to really get reoriented back in the story because of those time jumps and how they weren't necessarily like specified very well. But once we got into more of like a solid like one-time line scenario and things started happening, I definitely got invested in this. What I wasn't expecting is that the 2nd arc of the series, the books all end on cliffhangers. So if you're planning a read of the series, just, maybe keep that in mind. Overall, I had a really good time with this, but I do wish that the pacing and the time jumps were kind of ironed out a little bit more. This definitely took time to set up things for the 2nd arc of the series, which I understand, but definitely I think it could have been finessed a little bit more. And overall, book 2 is still my favorite of the series. And then the last book I picked up, as you can probably surmise from me saying that ended in a cliffhanger, is Age of Death, book 5 in Legends of the First Empire. And this one I was really excited for because of the title. I know that Michael J. Sullivan can break my heart in terms of the decisions he makes for a plot and for a character. And I was expecting the title of this being Age of Death, I was going to have some moments and some feelings about some things in here. But it turns out that instead of being like a story in the vein that I interpreted it as potentially being, it's more about some of the characters being in the underworld realm. And so I didn't necessarily hate that, we were in a new setting, but the thing is, the magic in this setting was changed. And because of that, kind of every scenario that the characters in that specific section of the book ran into had a very predictable result because of the new magic. And so in that respect, I felt like the stakes were way lower, and I just didn't enjoy this as much as I wanted to. I did think that this had a very clear start and end point, and it makes sense in terms of the direction of the series. But ultimately, because of the predictable like resolutions in this, and because of the clear like start and end point you knew was gonna be here kind of going into this book ultimately to me felt a little bit like filler, which I was sad about. My original plan was to binge through 4, 5, and 6 in the series, but after I finished this, I decided I needed just a bit of a break from it before I go back into Age of Empire. I'm hoping that when I go back, I end up loving Age of Empire. But anyway, those were all the books I managed to read in the month of November. Let me know if you've read any of these, what your thoughts were on them if you have, and also let me know what your favorite book of November was. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye!